Derek stood at the altar, his palms clammy against the smooth surface of his tuxedo. The cathedral around him was filled with guests, the kind of guests who only came to a wedding for the spectacle, the drama, and the indulgence. The air was thick with the scent of roses, the faint hum of whispers, and the faint echo of footsteps on polished marble. But in the midst of it all, Derek couldn't hear a thing. His heart pounded so loudly in his chest that it felt like a drumbeat, drowning out everything else. His mind spun in endless circles. He had never wanted any of this. He never asked for it. The grand ceremony, the designer rings, the impeccable guest list, it was all part of a plan his family had long since decided for him. A plan that didn't include his wants or needs. The pressure was suffocating. Derek had always done what was expected of him: excel in school, follow his parents' wishes, carry the weight of his family's legacy. And now, at 27, he was expected to marry a woman who checked all the boxes: wealthy, well-connected, polished, and perfectly suited to a life of high-society dinners and charity events. But Derek wasn't the kind of man who cared about status, wealth, or appearances. He had spent years pretending to be someone he wasn't, hiding behind a mask of smiles and well-rehearsed conversation. All he wanted was to break free. But in his world, freedom didn't come easy. There were rules. There were expectations. There was no room for deviation. The woman standing beside him now was a perfect stranger. Her name was Grace, but Derek couldn't recall the last time he'd actually looked at her. She had a professional smile plastered on her face, her makeup perfect, her hair an immaculate cascade of curls. She was the picture of everything Derek was supposed to want. But he couldn't feel anything. Not for her. Not for the life she promised. Not for any of it. The weight of his family's demands pressed on his chest like a vice. This marriage was meant to cement his place in the world he had never asked for. He was simply a pawn in their game of power and prestige. A marriage to Grace would fulfill their expectations, keep them happy, and finally end the relentless pressure. At least, that's what he told himself. But then, Maria walked in. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this day. Yet, there she was, standing at the back of the church, looking completely out of place amidst the extravagance of the ceremony. Her hair was messy, clothes torn, and eyes filled with a kind of exhaustion Derek knew all too well. He didn't know her, had never seen her before, but something about her caught his attention. It was that raw, unfiltered look. The kind of look that made him feel small for everything he had. She didn't belong here. But maybe, in that moment, neither did he. Derek's eyes followed her as she slowly moved through the crowd, as though she were invisible to the guests around her. She wasn't dressed for a wedding. She was dressed in the remnants of a life lived on the streets, a worn-out jacket, shoes that had seen better days, and a gaze that spoke of struggles he could hardly imagine. But what caught Derek's attention most was the fire in her eyes. There was a spark in Maria that he hadn't seen in anyone before. It was wild and untamed, like a force of nature he could not control, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it called to him. As the vows began, Derek's focus drifted. Grace's soft voice barely registered in his mind. Instead, he kept looking at Maria. She hadn't moved from the back of the room, and Derek found himself wondering why she was here. What was she doing in this world that she clearly didn't belong in? The words of the priest blurred around him. He was repeating the vows he had memorized, the same words that had been passed down for generations. He felt like a puppet, reciting lines he didn't believe in, just going through the motions. When it was time for the vows to be exchanged, his eyes met Grace's, and he spoke the words out of habit, out of obligation. "I, Derek, take you, Grace, to be my wife." The words felt hollow. But then, as if the universe itself were mocking him, he saw it. Maria had moved closer. She was standing at the side of the church now, her gaze fixed on him. Her eyes locked with his, and in that brief moment, something shifted. A strange mix of guilt and curiosity flooded Derek's chest. Why was she staring at him like that? He swallowed hard. This was wrong. She wasn't supposed to be here, and yet, she was. And somehow, it felt like she knew something he didn't. The kiss came next, sealing the deal. The guests cheered, but Derek couldn't bring himself to smile. It was over. He had done his duty. He had followed the script his family had written for him, and now, he could return to the life they had planned for him. But as he turned away from the altar, his eyes caught Maria's one last time. She was gone. Later that night, Derek sat alone in his newlywed suite, the weight of the day's events pressing down on him. His mind raced, replaying the moment when he saw Maria's eyes. He couldn't shake it. There was something about her, something that felt important, something that made him feel more alive than he had in years. Why was he so drawn to her? Why couldn't he stop thinking about her? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was a text from his mother. "Congratulations, Derek. I'm so proud of you. Welcome to the family, Grace." Derek stared at the message for a long time. The words felt like a foreign language, as if they weren't meant for him. This wasn't his life. This wasn't what he wanted. The next morning, everything was supposed to be perfect. The honeymoon, the perfect start to their perfect life. Grace was already planning their next steps, the perfect dinners, the perfect charity events. But all Derek could think about was Maria. The whole world around him felt like a carefully constructed lie. His family, Grace, the life they expected him to live, it was all just an illusion. Maria, on the other hand, was real. She had no agenda, no hidden motives. She was simply surviving. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't need to pretend. And there was something about her honesty, her rawness, that called to him. It was then that Derek made a decision that would change everything. He would find her. He needed to know who she was. He needed to know why she had been there, and why she had looked at him the way she had. The first step was finding out how to even begin looking for someone like Maria. But Derek knew it wasn't going to be easy. In the world he had grown up in, people like her weren't seen. They were invisible, just like the ones who suffered in silence. But that didn't matter anymore. He had to know. As the hours passed, Derek's determination grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that Maria had something important to reveal. But what? And why was he the one she had chosen to look at like that? Derek's world was about to unravel, and he had no idea how deep the mystery went. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. The days after the wedding felt like a blur. Derek had expected the usual post-marriage euphoria to settle in, the sense of accomplishment, perhaps even joy. After all, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a new life. But he didn't feel any of that. Instead, his thoughts were consumed by one question: who was Maria? He couldn't explain why she lingered in his mind, but there was something about her that he couldn't shake off. Something raw, something untamed. Every time he closed his eyes, her face appeared, those piercing eyes that had looked at him with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. It was as if she had seen straight through him, and in that fleeting moment, he had seen something in her too. A flicker of truth. He couldn't keep ignoring it. The more he thought about it, the more restless he became. Maria wasn't just some homeless woman standing in the back of a fancy wedding. No, there was more to her story, more to the way she had looked at him, like she knew something he didn't. But how could he find her? He didn't even know her last name. She wasn't listed in any public directory, nor did she have a social media presence. Derek had grown up surrounded by the wealth and resources of his family's connections, yet none of those things seemed to help him now. Maria wasn't part of their world. She wasn't someone anyone would think to look for. But Derek was determined. He spent the next few days slipping away from Grace and his family's events to search for any trace of Maria. His wealth, his privilege, they meant nothing in this world. This was a different battle, one that didn't involve money or power. It was about finding a woman who had, in just one fleeting moment, completely changed the course of his life. The first step. Derek's search began in the city's homeless shelters. He made phone calls, visiting several locations that catered to people in need. At each place, he showed a picture of Maria, but no one recognized her. His heart sank with each rejection. He couldn't help but feel a sense of desperation creeping in. He wasn't even sure why he was so desperate to find her. Was it because of her eyes? Was it the way she had stared at him like he was someone she knew? Or was it simply the fact that he had seen something in her that no one else had? Derek didn't know the answer, but he wasn't about to stop. On the fourth day of his search, after hours of visiting shelters and speaking to anyone who might have seen her, Derek found himself standing on a street corner in a part of town he had never ventured into before. The streets were narrow, crowded with people coming and going, some with tired faces, others with eyes that seemed lost. It was a different world from the luxury hotels and high-end restaurants he was used to. A man wearing ragged clothes stood at the corner holding a sign, his face hardened by years of struggle. Derek approached him, showing the same picture of Maria. The man looked at the photo and grunted. "I seen her. But she's not here anymore. She left a while back," the man said, his voice raspy. "Do you know where she went?" Derek asked, his voice tinged with frustration. The man shrugged. "She was just passing through. Couldn't say where she went. But I know where she used to hang around. Near the old church by 6th Street. Derek's pulse quickened. This was the break he had been waiting for. "Thank you," he said, offering a few dollars, but the man didn't take it. Instead, he simply nodded, his gaze already shifting to the street. Derek didn't waste any more time. He turned on his heel and headed towards 6th Street. A hidden past. As Derek walked down the narrow alley that led to the old church, he felt a sense of unease settling over him. The buildings here were run down, some of them boarded up, their faded paint and broken windows reflecting the struggles of the people who lived here. It was a world apart from the one he knew. When he finally reached the church, it was nothing like the opulent buildings he was used to. This church was small, its once white stone now cracked and dirty. The front steps were chipped, and the doors creaked as they opened. Derek stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The church was quiet, empty except for a few stray parishioners sitting in the back pews. But the moment he set foot inside, something felt off. He walked cautiously down the aisle, glancing around. There were no signs of Maria, no indication she had ever been here. The air felt thick with secrets. But then, as he neared the altar, he noticed something. A small piece of paper, folded neatly, lay on one of the pews. It was crumpled slightly, but still legible. Derek picked it up, his heart racing. It was a note, written in hurried handwriting. "Don't trust anyone. They're all after you. The truth will come out, but only if you let it." Derek's hands trembled as he read the words. The note made no sense, but it struck a chord deep within him. His mind raced. Who was it meant for? And why had it been left here, in a place so insignificant? It didn't seem like a coincidence. He quickly pocketed the note, his heart pounding. He needed answers. There was something bigger going on here, something that involved Maria. He couldn't ignore the feeling that he was being led down a path that would reveal secrets far deeper than he could have ever imagined. A revelation. Days passed, and Derek continued his search. Each lead seemed to fizzle out, each turn leading him to more questions than answers. Maria remained elusive, slipping through his fingers like smoke. Then, just as he was about to give up, Derek received an unexpected call. It was from an unfamiliar number, and at first, he hesitated to answer. But something told him to pick up. Derek Blake, a gruff voice on the other end asked. "Yes," Derek replied cautiously. "I know what you're looking for," the voice said. "I can help you find her, but you need to be ready. You're not prepared for what you're about to learn." Derek's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" "A friend of Maria's," the voice said, then hung up before Derek could ask another question. He stared at his phone, his mind spinning. This was it. The key he had been searching for was finally within reach. The meeting. A week later, Derek met the mysterious caller in a secluded cafe on the edge of the city. It was a quiet place, tucked away from the prying eyes of the world. The man who had called himself a friend of Maria's was sitting in the corner booth when Derek arrived. The man was in his mid-40s, rough around the edges, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like someone who had been through a lot. "You must be Derek," the man said, his voice low but firm. "I'm Carl. Maria told me about you." Derek slid into the seat across from him. "What do you know about her?" Carl glanced around the room, then leaned in closer. "Maria's past isn't what it seems. She's not just some random homeless woman. She's been running from something, someone, for years. People think she's crazy, but she's not. She's just trying to survive." Derek felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? What is she running from?" Carl hesitated before speaking. "There are people who will stop at nothing to find her. People who want to silence her before she can tell the truth. The truth about what happened years ago. About a secret that's bigger than anything you've ever imagined." Derek leaned forward, his curiosity getting the best of him. "What secret?" Carl looked over his shoulder one last time before he spoke again. "Maria's father. He was involved in something dangerous. Something illegal. And Maria, she knows everything." Derek's heart raced. This was bigger than anything he had expected. Maria wasn't just a victim. She was the key to something monumental. But the more Derek learned, the more questions he had. And the more he realized, he was now entangled in a story he didn't fully understand. A dangerous game. As Derek left the cafe, his mind was reeling. The pieces were starting to fit together, but they made a picture he wasn't ready to accept. Maria wasn't just some stranger with a hard life. She was someone who had lived through unimaginable pain and danger. And now, she was in even more danger than ever. But there was no turning back now. Derek was in this, whether he liked it or not. He needed to find Maria before it was too late. The truth was out there. But if he didn't act fast, he might never get the answers he was looking for. Derek's heart raced with every step he took after his meeting with Carl. The cafe had been quiet, the kind of place where secrets were meant to stay buried. But as Carl's cryptic words echoed in his mind, Derek realized he could no longer escape the reality of what he was dealing with. Maria's past was far darker and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just some homeless girl he had married to escape an arranged wedding. No, Maria was a survivor of something much more twisted. For the first time since their whirlwind marriage, Derek questioned whether he had done the right thing by marrying her. But there was no turning back now. He had made a promise, not just to Grace or his family, but to himself. He would find out the truth. He needed to understand Maria's secrets, her pain, and the dark forces that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The journey into the past. The next few days were a blur of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and constant searching. Derek found himself torn between the life he had built, wealth, status, privilege, and the growing pull of something much more real. Maria's truth, though it scared him, was something he couldn't ignore. He spent his nights in his study, scouring the internet for any information on Maria's father, the mysterious figure who seemed to haunt her past. There were no public records that matched, no mention of him in any news articles or criminal databases. It was as if he never existed. But then, late one evening, Derek stumbled upon a forum buried deep in the recesses of the web. It was a thread about missing persons, about people who had vanished without a trace. The thread was old, going back several years, but one name stood out. Maria's father. His name wasn't listed under the heading of missing persons. Instead, it was mentioned in a chilling context, the ghost of the streets. A man whose connections to organized crime and corrupt officials had earned him a notorious reputation. But more than that, the thread hinted at something far more sinister, a government conspiracy, something that Maria's father had gotten mixed up in, something so dark that even the most experienced investigators had backed away from it. Derek's fingers trembled as he clicked on the link. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but what he found sent a shockwave through his chest. The web of lies. The post wasn't long. It contained a list of names, dates, and cryptic messages. It was clear that the person who had written the post was afraid of someone finding out what they knew. The text was filled with references to covert operations, mysterious disappearances, and government cover-ups. But there was one sentence that stood out above the rest. Maria's father was the key to uncovering the truth. He knew too much. And now, she knows too much. Derek's mind raced. The mention of Maria's father, combined with the veiled warnings about her, sent a chill down his spine. He wasn't just dealing with a random encounter between a rich man and a homeless girl. This was something much bigger. Something with far-reaching consequences. What could Maria possibly know? And why hadn't she told him? Was she hiding something from him, or was she just too scared to speak? Derek's eyes flicked to the phone on his desk. He hadn't spoken to Maria since their marriage, aside from brief exchanges about mundane details. But after reading that post, something inside him snapped. He needed answers. He dialed Maria's phone number, but it rang and rang, going straight to voicemail. His heart sank. Was she avoiding him? Or was she in trouble? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He hung up, his mind racing, his thoughts tangled in confusion. The unexpected visitor. The next morning, Derek woke up early, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. He had no answers yet, but he knew that time was running out. Maria's past was closing in on him, and if he didn't act quickly, it might consume them both. As he stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the sun rising over the city, there was a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. His mind was still consumed with the details from the forum thread and the unanswered questions about Maria's father. But when he opened the door, he was greeted by an unexpected visitor. Carl. The man who had claimed to be a friend of Maria's was standing in front of him, looking even more disheveled than before. His face was drawn, and his eyes held a mixture of fear and determination. "I need to talk to you," Carl said, his voice tense. "It's important." Derek didn't hesitate. He stepped aside, allowing Carl to enter. The two men made their way into the living room, where Derek motioned for Carl to sit. "What is it?" Derek asked, unable to hide the urgency in his voice. Carl didn't waste any time. "You're in danger, Derek. Maria's not just some girl you married to avoid a forced marriage. She's been running from people who would do anything to silence her. People who are willing to kill to keep the truth hidden." Derek's blood ran cold. "What truth?" he demanded. Carl glanced around the room, as if making sure no one was listening. "Maria's father was part of something much bigger than you can imagine. The government, organized crime, powerful people, they all have a stake in what he knew. And now, they'll stop at nothing to find her. And you." Derek felt his chest tighten. This was no longer just about Maria. This was about him too. His life, his safety, it was all at risk. "I don't understand," Derek said, his voice shaking. "What does this have to do with me?" Carl's face was grim. "It's you, Derek. You're the link. You're the one who brought Maria back into the fold. By marrying her, you've unknowingly triggered something that was meant to stay buried." The room felt smaller as Carl's words sank in. Derek's mind was racing, but he couldn't process everything fast enough. He had thought he was doing the right thing. He had thought he was saving himself from a life he didn't want. But now, it seemed he had walked into a storm he couldn't control. "Where is she now?" Derek asked urgently. Carl shook his head. "I don't know. She's been moving from place to place, trying to stay ahead of them. She's scared, Derek. And she's not going to trust you until you prove you can protect her. You need to help her, not just for your sake, but for hers. You're involved whether you want to be or not." Derek was reeling, but the sense of urgency was starting to settle in. Maria wasn't just a girl caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was the key to something much bigger. And now, he was tied to her fate, whether he liked it or not. The escape. Carl's words echoed in Derek's mind as he made his way to his car. He had to find Maria. The pieces were falling into place, but there were still so many unknowns. Maria was in danger. And so was he. He drove through the city streets, his mind focused on one thing: getting to Maria before it was too late. The truth was out there, but it was buried beneath layers of lies, deceit, and danger. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about Maria. What had she been hiding all this time? Why had she never mentioned her father or the dangerous people after her? As he navigated through the streets, Derek knew one thing for certain: his life was no longer just his own. It was tied to Maria's, and if he couldn't protect her, everything would come crashing down. A hidden location. Derek's search for Maria took him through a maze of back alleys and forgotten parts of the city. His mind was consumed with the knowledge that he was being watched, followed by an unseen enemy. Every turn he took felt like a calculated move in a dangerous game he didn't fully understand. Eventually, Carl had led him to a small, nondescript building on the edge of town, an old warehouse that looked abandoned. But Carl had assured him that Maria was hiding here. Derek stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat as he looked around. The building was empty except for a few scattered boxes and old furniture, but at the back, there was a door leading to a stairwell. Carl gave Derek a nod. "She's up there." With each step, Derek's anxiety grew. What would he find at the top of those stairs? And what had Maria been running from all this time? He reached the door at the top of the stairs and pushed it open. And then, everything changed. The stage is now set for the final revelations. The mystery around Maria, her father, and the dangers they face continue to unfold, bringing Derek deeper into a world that challenges everything he thought he knew. Derek's pulse pounded as he reached for the door handle. The eerie silence of the warehouse pressed down on him. Every step he had taken in the past few days had led him here. Maria was inside. The woman he had married under false pretenses, the woman whose past was filled with shadows, the woman who had turned his life upside down. He pushed the door open. The dimly lit room smelled of dust and damp wood. Stacks of old crates lined the walls, and in the center of the space sat Maria, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her long, dark hair hung over her face, but when she looked up, her eyes locked onto his. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Derek," she said softly, her voice carrying exhaustion and fear. Derek's breath caught in his throat. For a brief moment, he didn't know what to say. 1,000 questions burned inside him, but none of them seemed to matter when he saw her like this, small, fragile, and utterly broken. Carl stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence. "Maria, we don't have much time. They're looking for you." Maria exhaled sharply and stood up. She looked at Derek again, searching his face for something, trust, perhaps, or understanding. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Derek clenched his fists. "I didn't have a choice. You think I could just walk away after everything I've learned?" Maria's jaw tightened. "You don't know everything." "Then tell me," Derek said, stepping closer. "Because from where I'm standing, I married a woman who's been running from something I don't understand, and now, I'm caught in the middle of it. I deserve to know the truth." Maria swallowed hard. Her body was tense, as if she was fighting an internal war. Finally, she exhaled and sat back down. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek nodded, bracing himself. Maria looked down at her hands. Her fingers twisting together. "My father, he wasn't just some criminal, Derek. He worked for them." Derek frowned. "Them? Who's them?" She hesitated before answering. "The government. But not in the way you think. The sinister truth." The room felt colder as Maria began speaking, her voice barely concealing the pain behind her words. "My father was recruited when I was a child. He wasn't a politician, a cop, or a soldier. He was something else. He worked in intelligence, but not officially. He did the kind of work the government would never admit to. He found people. People who had seen things they weren't supposed to see. People who knew things they weren't supposed to know. And then, her voice broke for a second. And then he made them disappear." Derek's stomach twisted. "Disappear?" Maria nodded. "They were never seen again." He took a step back, trying to process her words. "Your father was an assassin?" Maria shook her head. "Not exactly. He was more like a cleaner. When someone posed a threat to national security, he would make sure they didn't exist anymore. But then one day, he found something he wasn't supposed to." Derek could feel the weight of the moment. "What did he find?" Maria took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to continue. "A list. A list of names. Some were criminals, but others were just innocent people. Scientists, journalists, whistleblowers. They were being eliminated, not because they were dangerous, but because they knew something the government didn't want the public to find out." Derek's blood ran cold. Maria's hands trembled. "My father made a mistake." He hesitated. He tried to protect one of them, a scientist who had uncovered proof of illegal human experiments being conducted in secret. But before he could get her to safety, they found out. They went after him. Derek's voice was hoarse. "What happened?" Maria let out a shaky breath. "He went into hiding. But before he disappeared, he sent me something. A file. It contained everything he had discovered. Names, locations, proof of what they were doing. I was only 15. I didn't understand what I had. But they did. And they've been after me ever since." Derek felt the air in his lungs tighten. He had expected secrets. He had expected danger. But this? This was something else entirely. "This is why you were on the streets?" he asked. Maria nodded. "I had nowhere to go. I couldn't use my real name. Every time I stayed in one place too long, people started asking questions. I couldn't risk it. But then you came along." Derek's throat went dry. "And now they're after me too." Maria's eyes filled with guilt. "I never meant for this to happen. The enemy approaches." Carl shifted uncomfortably. "We need to move. Now. If I could find you, they can too." Maria stood up, her body tense. We can't run forever. Derek clenched his jaw. He had spent his entire life surrounded by money, privilege, and luxury. He had never truly feared for his life before. But now, standing in this abandoned warehouse with Maria and Carl, he knew things would never be the same again. "We need to get out of here," Carl urged. But before they could move, a noise from outside made them freeze. Footsteps. The sound of multiple boots on gravel. Maria's eyes widened in panic. "They found us." Derek's heart pounded. "Is there another way out?" Carl nodded toward the back. "There's a fire escape, but we have to move fast." The footsteps grew louder. Shadows moved past the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Maria grabbed Derek's hand. "We have to go. Now." Derek didn't hesitate. He followed Maria and Carl toward the back door, his pulse racing. He could hear voices now, deep, commanding, and close. Carl pushed open the emergency exit, and the three of them slipped into the alley. The cold night air hit Derek's face as they ran. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Behind them, the warehouse door burst open, and shouts filled the air. They had seconds before the men caught up. Carl led them toward a black SUV parked at the end of the alley. He yanked the door open. "Get in." Maria jumped in first, and Derek followed. Carl slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. Headlights flooded the alley. The men had found them. Carl hit the gas, and the SUV lurched forward. Gunshots rang out, shattering the back window. Derek ducked, shielding Maria as glass rained down. The car sped through the streets, weaving through traffic at dangerous speeds. Maria clutched Derek's arm, her breathing ragged. "This won't stop," she whispered. Derek looked at her, his own fear matching hers. "Then we fight." Maria's lips parted in shock. "You don't understand what you're saying." Derek held her gaze. "I don't care. I married you to escape one life. I didn't expect this, but I'm not leaving you." Maria's eyes filled with something Derek hadn't seen before, hope. Carl swerved onto the highway. "We need a plan." Derek looked at Maria. "Then let's make one." The chase had begun. And there was no turning back. Will Derek, Maria, and Carl find safety, or will the people chasing them finally catch up? What secrets does Maria's father's file contain? The danger is just beginning. Derek's heart hammered in his chest, each beat resonating through his body. The engine of the SUV roared as Carl expertly swerved through the winding highway. They were being chased. He could hear the tires screeching behind them, the relentless pursuit of men who wouldn't stop until they had Maria. And now, Derek was caught in the web too. Maria sat beside him, her face pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. He could feel the weight of her fear pressing against him, but there was something else in her eyes, a spark of resolve. She wasn't giving up. Neither was he. "How long do you think we can keep this up?" Derek asked, his voice strained as he gripped the seat. Carl didn't respond immediately. His eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke. "Not long. We're not dealing with ordinary people here. Whoever is after Maria, they're thorough." Derek knew that much already. They had been driving for hours, and the men chasing them had stayed right on their tail, no matter how many times Carl turned sharply or took unexpected routes. It was like they were playing a deadly game of cat and mouse, with the odds stacked against them. Maria turned to Derek, her voice barely above a whisper. "They know us. They know who we are now. It's only a matter of time before they figure out where we're going." Derek nodded. His mind raced. Where could they go? Where could they hide that these people wouldn't find them? His whole life, he had been shielded by money, power, and status, but none of that mattered now. He was a target. They were all targets. "Where's the file?" Derek asked, glancing at Maria. Maria hesitated for a moment before she pulled out a small, worn envelope from her jacket pocket. She didn't open it, she just held it in her hands, as though the weight of the file itself was enough to hold all the answers they needed. Carl glanced over at the file, then back to the road. "We need to look at it." "I know you're scared, Maria, but we can't keep running blind." Maria's eyes were dark with exhaustion and fear. "I've never wanted this. I never wanted to drag you into my mess, Derek." He shook his head. "This isn't just your mess anymore. We're in this together." Maria slowly opened the envelope, pulling out the documents one by one. She handed them to Derek. He glanced through them quickly. His eyes scanned the names, the coded messages, and the disturbing photographs scattered across the pages. But nothing could prepare him for what he found at the very end, a map. "Where is this?" Derek asked, pointing at the marked location on the map. Maria's voice trembled as she looked at the map. "That's where my father was last. That's where he found the proof. But it's a black site. No one is supposed to know about it." Derek leaned closer, trying to make sense of the crisscrossing lines and coordinates. "A black site? What does that mean?" "It's a secret government facility," Maria explained, her voice tight. "A place where they do things they don't want anyone to know about. If my father went there and found what he did, I'm not sure what's worse. The government coming after us, or what's waiting at that site." Carl's hands tightened on the wheel. "So, this is where it all started. This is the endgame, isn't it?" Maria nodded, her eyes downcast. "If we go there, there's no turning back." Derek stared out the window, his mind reeling. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. His comfortable life, his secure world, had shattered. And now, he was running for his life. The lights from the pursuing cars flashed in the rearview mirror. They were getting closer. "We need to make a decision," Carl said. "Do we stop and fight, or do we try to get to the black site and figure out what's going on there?" Derek felt the weight of the question. He couldn't keep running. He couldn't keep hiding. He needed answers. They needed answers. And if it meant putting themselves in danger, so be it. "Take us to the black site," Derek said, his voice firm. Maria's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Just get us there," Derek replied. "We don't have a choice." Carl nodded, his expression grim. He veered off the highway, cutting through a narrow side road that seemed to disappear into the darkness. The pursuit continued, but Carl wasn't slowing down. He was pushing the SUV to its limits. The darkness outside seemed to swallow them whole as Carl navigated the twisting roads. There were no streetlights. No signs of civilization. Only the thick trees and the distant mountains. It felt like they were driving straight into the heart of nowhere. Derek kept his eyes on the map in his hands. The coordinates matched, and the black site wasn't far. But the tension inside the car was unbearable. Maria had gone silent, her face a mask of anxiety. Derek could feel the heat radiating off her, her anxiety weighing down the air in the car. After what felt like hours, Carl slowed down, pulling off onto a dirt path. The SUV bumped along the rugged terrain, the tires crunching on gravel and rocks. "Are we close?" Derek asked, his voice tight. "We're almost there," Carl said, his eyes scanning the area around them. "This place is well hidden. Whoever's behind it doesn't want anyone finding it." Maria looked out the window, her eyes narrowing as she studied the dense forest around them. "We can't stay here long. Once they catch up to us." "They won't," Derek said, his voice sharp. "We'll make sure of that." Carl stopped the SUV near a small clearing. The area was covered in trees, and there was an eerie quiet surrounding them. "This is it," Carl said, turning off the engine. Derek glanced at Maria. "Are you sure this is where your father was?" Maria nodded. "He said it was a place where they erased everything. They wiped every trace of the people who went inside. He never came back." The silence in the car was deafening. Derek's mind raced with what might be waiting for them at the site. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far. "We need to move quickly," Carl said, breaking the silence. "We can't afford to wait for them to catch up." The three of them climbed out of the SUV, their footsteps crunching on the forest floor. Derek felt the weight of the night press down on him as they made their way through the woods. Every sound seemed amplified, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The fear was palpable. They reached the edge of a small, overgrown clearing, and Derek's heart skipped a beat. Ahead of them stood a massive concrete structure, half buried in the earth. It was barely visible in the dim light, but Derek could see the outlines of a reinforced metal door. "This is it," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. Derek stepped forward, his mind focused. He wasn't sure what they would find inside. But one thing was certain, they couldn't let fear stop them now. "We need to get in," he said, his voice steady. Carl approached the door, searching for a way in. The door was old, rusted, and barely holding together. After a few moments, he found the latch and yanked it open. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a narrow corridor that led into darkness. Derek's breath caught in his throat. He knew they were entering the unknown. But they had no other choice. What lies behind the door? What secrets does the black site hold? Will Derek, Maria, and Carl uncover the truth or fall into the trap that's been set for them? The final part of the story will bring everything to a head: answers, dangers, and unexpected twists. Derek's heart raced as he stepped into the dark, musty corridor of the black site. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. Maria's past. The file. The secret government facility. Everything had led them here. The door creaked shut behind them with a finality that made the silence even more suffocating. "Stay close," Carl whispered, his eyes darting around the dim hallway. His voice was steady, but there was a tension in his movements that Derek couldn't ignore. They all knew this was it, the point of no return. Maria had gone quiet again. She was walking just ahead of Derek, her face pale but determined. Her steps were sure, but Derek could sense the fear lurking beneath the surface. She wasn't just afraid of what was coming. She was afraid of what they would find. The corridor stretched on ahead, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air felt thick, like it had been undisturbed for years, filled with the weight of secrets long buried. Derek's eyes kept flicking to the walls as they moved deeper into the building. The place was old, abandoned even. But the sense of danger, of something much more sinister, was palpable. "Maria," Derek said softly, trying to break the silence, "what exactly did your father find here?" Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "He found the truth. The truth about the experiments. About what they were doing to people. They were manipulating human biology. Creating something that wasn't human." Derek felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of experiments? What does this have to do with you?" Maria stopped walking. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of dread and determination. "It has everything to do with me, Derek. My father, he didn't just protect me. He was hiding me. They weren't just experimenting on people. They were experimenting on children. On me. And the people in charge, they wanted me. They knew what I could do." Derek's mind spun. "You're saying, you're one of their experiments?" Maria nodded slowly. "Yes. I was one of the first. Carl spoke up from behind them. We don't have time for this right now. If they're still looking for you, we need to move. Maria turned toward the sound of his voice, her face hardening. You don't understand. This is why they're hunting me. Because of what I am. Derek felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. What do you mean, what you are? Maria closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was something different in her gaze. Something raw. I wasn't just a subject of their experiments. I was a weapon. Derek's mind reeled. Weapon? He thought back to everything Maria had said before, her father's secretive past, the government's dark projects. None of it had prepared him for this. What does that mean? He asked, his voice shaky. Maria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and led them down the hallway. The flickering lights cast long, twisting shadows on the walls. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the building itself was closing in on them. They reached the end of the hallway and stopped in front of a steel door. Maria didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and pressed a hand against the cold surface of the door. There was a small panel to the side, and Maria's fingers moved quickly over the keypad. The door clicked open with a soft hiss. Derek stood frozen for a moment. What was behind this door? What kind of truth had they come all this way to uncover? Maria stepped inside without looking back. Carl and Derek exchanged a brief glance before following her into the room. The door closed behind them with another soft hiss, leaving them in near total darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of a screen on the far side of the room. It was an old computer terminal, one that seemed out of place in the otherwise abandoned facility. Maria walked straight toward it. This is it, she said, her voice steady. This is where it all began. Derek stepped closer, his eyes scanning the room. It was sterile, clinical, nothing like the rest of the building. There were no signs of decay or age here, only the cold, metallic surfaces that spoke of a place long forgotten by the outside world. Maria reached the computer and began typing quickly. The screen flickered to life, revealing a complex series of files, data, and diagrams. Derek leaned in, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Everything your father found is here, Maria said, her voice tight with emotion. The experiments, the tests, the children. Everything. Derek felt his stomach lurch as he glanced at the screen. There were names. Dates. Files labeled with code words that made no sense to him. And there were photographs, disturbing, horrifying images of people who seemed altered. Changed. Some of them looked almost human, but there was something wrong in their eyes, something that made Derek's skin crawl. Maria clicked on one of the files, and the image that appeared on the screen made Derek's blood run cold. It was a photo of a young girl, no older than 8 or 9. Her eyes were wide and terrified, but it was her face that held his attention. There was something unsettlingly familiar about her features. That's me, Maria said quietly, pointing at the girl on the screen. That's who I used to be. Derek's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the image, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Maria's face, but not the one he knew. This was a child, a version of her he had never seen before. What did they do to you? Derek asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she clicked through more files, revealing page after page of medical records, experimental data, and more photographs. There were references to genetic manipulation, altered DNA strands, and the creation of something entirely new. A hybrid. A weapon. I don't remember everything, Maria said, her voice distant. But I remember enough. I remember waking up in a lab, with people staring at me. They weren't doctors. They were scientists. And they had been watching me since I was born. They wanted to see what would happen when they pushed human limits, what would happen when they mixed human genes with something else. Derek's mind spun. Something else? What are you talking about? Maria's eyes were hollow, haunted. They used alien technology. They didn't just manipulate human DNA, they fused it with something otherworldly. Derek's blood ran cold. Alien technology? The pieces were coming together, but he still couldn't fully comprehend the scale of what Maria was saying. You're saying, you're not entirely human? Derek asked. Maria closed her eyes and nodded slowly. I was the first. The prototype. But they wanted more. They wanted an army of people like me, people who could do things no one else could. But I was different. I didn't want to be their weapon. So I ran. Derek felt his stomach tighten. The girl he had married, the woman he thought he knew, was not who she seemed. She was a creation, a product of something far darker than he could have ever imagined. But your father, he tried to protect you, Derek said, his voice thick with disbelief. Maria nodded. He did everything he could. But when they found out what he was hiding, they went after him. And now, they're after me again. Derek turned to Carl, his mind racing. What do we do now? Carl's face was grim. We've got the evidence. We've got what we need. We just have to get it out of here. Before Derek could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the room. They were here. The people Maria had been running from were closing in. Get the file, Carl ordered, his voice urgent. We have to move. Now. Maria grabbed the USB drive from the computer and shoved it into her pocket. She looked at Derek, her face a mask of fear and determination. We can't let them get this. If they do, it's over for us. Derek nodded, his mind focused. Then we fight. The footsteps were getting louder, closer. The final confrontation was moments away. Would Derek, Maria, and Carl escape with the truth, or would the forces after them finally catch up? The answers they sought were within their reach, but the danger was greater than ever. What price would they pay for uncovering the truth? The story's final moments would leave everything hanging in the balance.